If you've been comfortably playing trading card games for a while, you may not remember that learning to play a trading card game is a long and complicated process. The first thing you'll usually look for is the basic rulebook, but in many ways this is only the visible tip of an iceberg that goes down way deeper than new players might expect and established players might appreciate. For designers, this is an iceberg that they should be very familiar with if they want their game to function as they intend. As a minor spoiler, the final layer in this iceberg, down at the very bottom, is the metagame, or how the relative power of different cards and effects interact. Getting from the basics of how to play to learning how to plan and play around the metagame takes a lot of different steps, and for the next few videos I want to dive into a few of those steps in detail. Before we start exploring the part of the iceberg that's underwater though, let's take a look at what's visible on the surface first. When you're learning to play a trading card game, the first place you're going to go is the rulebook. Not the comprehensive rules, but a starter how to play guide. While the whole point of this series is that this how to play starter rule guide is really only the tip of an iceberg, the rules are still very important for a few reasons. First, whether a new player is watching a YouTube tutorial, being taught by a friend, or actually reading through the starter rule guide, the basic rules are going to be a new player's first exposure to a game. So designers should make sure that those rules are going to present the game in the best light possible. If the rules are overly complicated, it's going to alienate new players and make it difficult to build up a player base. However, rules that are too simple can miss out on simple quality of life fixes that are going to help streamline some of the awkward points of gameplay. The simplest example is the draw penalty for the first turn that basically exists for every TCG. This does add a little bit of extra rule text, but it goes a long way towards balancing the first turn advantage that's present in most games. Another slightly more in-depth example is Dawn in One Piece being able to be attached to characters to give them a power boost. This does add a decent amount of rules complexity, since not only do you have to learn that that's something you can do with your resources, but you also need to learn what happens when the character that Dawn is attached to is going to leave play, and some other corner cases. One Piece would run just fine if the Dawn only acted as resources, but adding this extra function acts as a safety valve both for flooding and stalls, and it helps avoid some undesirable game situations. This leads into the second point. Rules set out the basic flow of a game and are the fallback in situations where there are few relevant card effects floating around. What the rules say isn't necessarily going to determine how the game plays. A famous example is Yu-Gi-Oh!, where if you just read the rulebook, you'd probably have no clue just how blisteringly fast the actual gameplay is. In any game with the depth of game pieces that a TCG has, effects are going to have a substantial impact on gameplay, but there's always going to be points in the game where there's just not a lot of effects running around. Whether this is a particularly underpowered draft format or the result of a long battle of attrition where neither player has many cards left to play, there are always going to be points where the gameplay falls back into the core rules, and in those cases you really want to make sure that the core rules are functional enough to still deliver a satisfying game experience. Finally, the rules also lay out many of the central concepts that are used in a game. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, learning about spells, traps, and monsters is all well and good, but you also want to pay attention to all of the extra deck mechanics that are mentioned in the rules as well. In Duel Masters, you want to make sure that you know all about shield triggers before deciding on a plan of attack. These aren't just individual mechanics that are printed on a few cards here and there. They are fundamental tools that a player is going to need to master. Even more importantly, the rules also lay out foundational concepts that underpin the entire game. You can change a lot of aspects of a game with card effects, such as adding easy draw and search if the standard one card per turn ends up being a bit slow. But there are certain parts of a game that are much more difficult to change no matter what card effects you try and add in. Things like how to win, the phases of a turn, and the game's priority system are all set out in the rules, and although there are small subsets of cards that can change these concepts really create the basic premise of interaction within their game. For an example, Magic has a very open, response-based priority system that lets players use instant speed effects at almost any time, including their opponent's turn. And Magic would be a very different game if instead it had a Pokemon-style system with a much more restrictive spell timing. A player that plays Magic as if it had a Pokemon-style priority system will be easily defeated by a more nimble opponent who prioritizes more precise interaction timing. In this way, the core rules really act as a foundation under everything else that the game is doing. Overall, I think that's really the best way to think of the core rules in a trading card game. They're the foundation. It's the level that new players enter and the level that everything else is built on top of. So you really want to make sure that they are solid without being overwhelming. This doesn't exactly fit the iceberg metaphor, but in the next video we'll start doing a bit of diving and explore some of the aspects of trading card game gameplay that are hiding a little bit deeper under the water. Until then, hopefully your journey learning a new game or designing a new set of rules is smooth sailing, and have a fantastic day.